Okay, so it's been a few days since we pulled it apart. Going together, as we discussed, coming apart was a bear. We had to beat this knuckle downward as if these bearing races were seized to this, what I'm going to call spindle, this upright down thing. And planning ahead, going back together, I could see it was going to just be a bear driving everything back together, and then just running into issues. So what I did do is I took the time, I spent a lot of time burnishing, if you will, or sanding these areas where the bearings go on, and they were indeed sized that there's an interference fit. Watching everybody else pull these things apart, I didn't have nearly a struggle I did. And then I never really did find anything directly for the B21. The manual says nothing about pressing this assembly off or beating it in any way. It just say remove snap ring at the bottom and remove item from A from B. And it didn't go that smooth. So, back to what I was saying, I used this 180 grit, was pretty aggressive, but it still took a lot of time. Folded it in half, so we had basically something, maybe 3/4 of an inch wide or so, and just two hands wrapped it around here carefully and just seesawed it back and forth on all sides, all different angles, and just kept, this is removed from that steering knuckle, this bearing, this is the lower bearing, and just sized it so that it still had somewhat of an interference fit, but not nearly as tight. That way, when you put the loader down on the ground, you're not relying on a snap ring only to hold this whole assembly together. So, but at least when these two bearings are assembled in the steering knuckle and you go to slide that back up, maybe a simple floor jack just to drive it in place nice and gentle, because the way it was, I think the whole machine would have just picked up as I would try to jack it. So I'm just trying to plan ahead, and I'm not saying this is the right way, but it's the way I chose to do it. So I treated this bearing race surface as well as this one up here. Now this bearing you can see is on in place, and what I did is I used the bearing to drive the new seal on. The seal, let's see if we can, the edge is beveled, that points downward, okay? When you go to drive this new thing on, this new knuckle, or the old knuckle back on, the other half of the seal, this is I guess the inner race which presses on. That seal is actually in that knuckle. You don't want any sharp edges on this, and this is nice and beveled. I know it's a little hard to see in here, but there we go. The edge is beveled, so striking this with a hammer, there's no surface area really to get at. So I thought, why not use the bearing to drive it on, because it actually was the perfect surface area for it. So being that that bearing is still got somewhat of an interference fit, I had to tap it upward, and I used a hammer on a hammer. And when you do stuff like that, you gotta be careful you don't get any shards of metal, shrapnel hitting you, so wear your safety glasses. And this was the most controllable way, just work it back and forth. You could just use one hammer, but I used a hammer on hammer so I didn't mar up the spindle if I missed with each hit. So this new seal is in place. It's driven just about all the way up. I'll drive this bearing down again with the hammer, and just make sure that seal's all the way up. If I have to, I'll use the old seal to finish the travel. I think we have just a little bit more to go. I have to look at it a little closer, but we're close. So that's what I did, and then we can put the rest of the seal back in the new bearings, which I'm waiting for, because these poor bearings, if I had any doubt before, that I beat them up. I definitely beat them up more by sizing these and trying to refit them and tap them on and tap them back off, and just looking for the right fit. So you don't want to hammer on bearings and rely on them. And yes, they're not going at any high rates of speed, but they are holding the load that gets picked up in a bucket. And there's just so much going on with drive shafts and tolerances and shims up here. I don't want to have any problems. So bearings are cheap in the long scheme of things, even though they were $50 a piece, I think, what they told me. The price these days. But on to the next step. Okay, so the seal did have to go up a little bit more. A little brass punch with a wide face, and just carefully, progressively work it back up. And that race, I keep calling it a seal, it's actually the seal race, should be flush with the step in the spindle when you're done. And I put a little bit of oil resistant silicone on the spindle before driving that race in place, and the final few steps of tapping up, actually you can see that silicone squeeze out, so I knew it was driven home. So if you can see that, that's a little better. Alright, and just make sure that's all the way up, and then your assembly for your knuckle is next, and then put it together. Okay, new bearings slid right in, just a little light tapping, a brass punch on the outer race, and they really went in pretty easy. Bearing numbers 6910 and 6911. They're a unique narrow series from what the guy at the bearing supply told me. They weren't really any cheaper than the Kubota dealer. In fact, I think one of the ones from the Kubota dealer were probably cheaper. So if you do this as Kubota parts, probably way to go. And now we just have to install the seal, which the inner race, it's on a tractor already. There's nothing here to drive it in on, no flat surface. This is the side that goes in, this is the side that's out. So maybe, I'm thinking, we'll see, but use the old inner race to drive it in. I don't know. So if you're following along at home, again, this is my methods, doing the best I can. Just use this video as a guide, but pay attention when you pull things apart. I don't remember how far this seal is supposed to stick out. I think I drove it all the way in. I kind of remember a rubbery lip sticking out. There's a very soft rubbery lip on the edge. But anyway, I used the old inner seal surface that came off the spindle to drive it in. I cleaned it up best I thought, pretty good, but there's still some cross contamination, so now I got to clean the seal out of the grease, or the grease out of the seal, that is. So maybe if you're following along at home, put the seal in its entirety, and then put this piece on the spindle after the fact. Okay, but finding the right size socket and driving that socket in drove the seal in pretty nicely. Just had to work it slowly, get it started, and then just kind of in a circular motion walk it right in. Okay, so once this bearings and seals are in place, bring the assembled unit back over the machine. Have a floor jack handy, makes it a little easier just to hold it up so you're not fighting gravity the whole time. And start lining up on the spindle, start lifting the thing up into place, and slowly but surely at the same time you can turn this little pinion gear in the top of the shaft. The splines, you will all of a sudden feel them kind of click and go into place, and then you can push the thing up a little further. And you know, all this carefully while working a floor jack and kind of driving the bearings onto the spindle. Just don't force anything. Kind of move the thing back and forth a little bit. Once you get the bottom of the spindle engaged into that bearing a little bit in the bottom there, you can see that kind of through the hole here, and then start working it up. Again, check, make sure this is turning while you're going up, and I'm turning the whole innards of the whole front axle now, so because the thing is assembled, and start working it up. Nice slight drag on the bearings going up, which is nice. It'll come apart a little easier next time. And the last thing you do, that snap ring in there, make sure it's seated all the way around and in the back properly. That comes off, you'll lose your wheel if you put your bucket down, put the front end in the air. Alright, and then from here on out, clean, degrease the surface all the way around, and prep the unit for assembly with some oil resistant silicone sealant, and then reassemble. Preparing to mate the two pieces, just put a thin layer of silicone on, oil resistant type, and wait an hour or so for it to begin to set. That routine seems to work for me. This is the mating half, ready to go as well. Just remember, this ring gear put on in place, behind it are the two keepers installed, a little dab of grease on each one. Seat this ring gear in all the way to hold those keepers in place, and have that bearing in place, and pre-assembly look should look like this. That end of that stub shaft just sunk into the bearing just a little bit. That's the spacing of everything ready to go together. Good luck with yours. Okay, so it's assembled. One thing that was very handy is that we lined it up. There's two dowel pins, one over here, one over here, and it's a little tricky to get it started. You don't want to go tapping on it with a hammer, because you might move that gear that's on the back, thus then dislodging the keepers for the stub shaft here that holds your wheel on. So nice gentle approach as I tried to slide it in. I just took a pair of channel locks and I just squeezed on each side, and it basically walked it right in on the dowel pins. So that worked good, nice and gentle. And then torque them in a circular pattern. The book says 41 foot-pounds, and same for the tie rod end. So you see that's connected back up with the nut and cotter pin, 41 foot-pounds, and we'll let this sit 12 to 24 hours. Let the sealant fully cure before putting oil in the unit. We have a plug on the top of this steering knuckle. You can remove that, and you could either fill through that and or the dipstick hole, having them both out so you get air escaping as you're putting the oil in, so you don't get it blown back in your face. But that dipstick has a mark on it, and it's about half 5/8 of an inch up. Alright, and that equates to a little over halfway on the axle tube when the system's full. So just a little note on that for you. That's the assembly. The B21 steering knuckle, and it completes the oil seal job. Hope yours goes easier than mine. Alright, thanks for watching.